Chapter 6. Peacemaker did not like hornets, or wasps, or yellow jackets, or honeybees. On second thought, honeybees were fine, but he still preferred keeping them a long distance away from it. Come to think of it, Peacemaker was not fond of any kind of black and yellow insect that made a loud buzz and had stingers. They always creeped him out, always flying so close to your ear, stinging you if you accidentally got too close to them. Sometimes, Peacemaker wondered why the insects even existed in the first place. Whenever his mother took him out of the village, in order to gather food or crafting items to help the Nightwing settlement, he was always on the lookout for hornet nests. Anyone who said his fear was irrational clearly does not know much about the wasps or hornets that buzz around in the rainforest. Look at the size of their stingers! Of all the professors at the Jade Mountain Academy, Professor Longhorn was unique because she was the only teacher in the school who was a Pantalon dragon, a hivewing to be exact. Like most hivewings, at least what Peacemaker was told behind an alligator, Professor Longhorn's scales had a yellow and black pattern that resembled those of a bee or wasp, though the black was more dominant than the yellow. This resemblance, Peacemaker silently admitted, made him a little nervous. But personality-wise, she was not a bad teacher. She was strict, she pushed her students, but she was hardly ever a bad teacher. She was great, always encouraging her students to try hard equations. Though, when she was angry, she was angry. Peacemaker and his winglet, while never being on the receiving end of this anger, had heard how she verbally tore into two students from the Copper Winglet for something they did while in class. He silently hoped that today was not his turn to be yelled at as Professor Longhorn requested he stay. He found it difficult to tell what she was thinking when her expression was neutral. Needless to say, Peacemaker was not feeling particularly confident as Professor Longhorn asked to meet with him after class. Now, here he was, sitting on one side of her desk as the math professor gathered some scrolls, most likely his work, and brought them over and placed them on the table between them. Peacemaker cautiously looked up at Professor Longhorn's green eyes, her neutral gaze meeting his own. "Peacemaker," Professor Longhorn spoke, causing Peacemaker to fully raise his head, bracing himself for what she might say. "I wanted to speak with you about your test from the last unit." "Okay," Peacemaker spoke, his breath getting caught in the back of his throat, making it feel cold. Professor Longhorn searched through the scrolls before pulling out a group of them pinned together, which included the questions that Jaguar had helped him answer a few weeks back. Taking a deep breath, Peacemaker slowly pulled it closer to him and looked at the score. Of 50 questions on the unit test, he got 40 correct. Peacemaker's eyes widened with excitement and relief at what he saw. This was a major improvement from his regular scores. Whereas he would barely get a passing grade from Professor Longhorn's class, this test showed he was getting better. Looking up at the hivewing, Peacemaker saw the faintest hint of a smile on her lips. "Congratulations, Peacemaker," Professor Longhorn spoke, nodding her head at him approvingly. "I know this class is one of a few that have been a struggle for you, but I see your improvement, as does Webb's." Peacemaker felt pride swell in his chest, making it feel warm. He couldn't wait to tell his mother, Moon, and the others that he was doing well. "Thank you, Professor," Peacemaker replied, smiling. "You still have some areas you need to improve on, though," Professor Longhorn said, gesturing to his test. "But I feel that when you rearrange your schedule, such as getting more sleep, you will be able to focus in class." Professor Longhorn's suggestion made him pause. She was right, But she also did not know that it was not his fault that he was not getting much sleep at night. The nightmares had become worse, more vivid in the last couple of weeks. Some were of the Ice Wing, always appearing bloodied in his dreams when they started well. Then he heard voices yelling at him, screaming at him in agony. It was hard to get a good night's sleep. Normally, if he didn't sleep well, Peacemaker had his mother or Moon to talk to. But here, in the academy, he did not want to burden his winglet with something outside of their control. It was his personal problem to deal with. Looking back up at the hive wing, Peacemaker nodded appreciatively. "I will try," he answered. "Thank you, Professor Longhorn." "Good," she replied, standing up from her seat. "Now move along, Peacemaker. I told Sunny I would be keeping you for a few minutes after my class. Best you get to hers now. She has an interesting announcement." Luckily, Peacemaker had just gotten to Sunny's class in time for the announcement. As soon as he entered the anthropology cave, the Sandwing teacher paused and smiled at him as he arrived. He wondered if she knew that Professor Longhorn wanted to congratulate him on his performance for the end of the unit test. Finding his seat next to Cliff, Sunny continued her announcement. "You all did really well on the Sea-Wing Cultural Unit," Sunny explained, earning some excited mutters from the class. Gesturing her talent to the Sea-Wings of the class, she continued. "Thank you to all of the Sea-Wings who helped their winglets succeed." "Pretty smart when you think about it," Cliff whispered to Peacemaker. "Doing a unit on the different aspects of a tribe, allowing each member to take charge of it and help the winglet." "Yeah," Peacemaker replied. "Gives us a chance to share something about ourselves." Alligator glanced at Peacemaker and Cliff. "Though your discussion on Queen Scarlet's death was detailed," Alligator whispered, cringing at how Cliff had discussed Scarlet's death and how his mother had killed her. "Well, it is a proud moment to most of the Skywings." The prince shrugged casually. "Yes, but couldn't you have—" "Ahem!" The conversation was cut with the interjection of Sunny, who looked at the three members of the Quartz Winglet with a raised brow. While Sunny was not seriously strict as a teacher, none of the students wanted to outwardly disrespect her because of how much she helped her students. Peacemaker, Alligator, and Cliff went silent, allowing Sunny to continue. When Sunny was satisfied, she continued. "Normally, we would move on to the next tribe," Sunny explained. "But in a few weeks, we will instead focus on a particular subject that most dragons do not know about." This earned some confused glances among the class. Peacemaker, admittedly, was curious. Normally, after covering details of a tribe's culture, they would move on to a new unit. The Sea-Wing tribe unit still had a few more areas to cover, but why would Sunny not want to move on to the next tribe? "The unit we will cover—" Sunny paused, almost uncertain of how this news would be received by the class. But, finally, she spoke. "Is about scavengers." There was silence in the cave. No murmurs, just surprised silence. Beside Peacemaker, however, he could see that Alligator looked completely elated at the news. His favorite subject, scavengers, would be covered in the class. Peacemaker tapped the Mudwing's shoulder. As Alligator looked at him, Peacemaker smiled encouragingly. Alligator smiled back as he looked forward. Sunny continued. "In order to help me cover this unit, we'll be having a guest who has studied scavengers for quite some time. I just received their letter, and they have agreed to co-teach with me." A few mutters of curiosity came from the class. Some sounded genuinely curious about the new unit that they would be learning about. Some were neutral. Others were completely uninterested, but kept it to themselves and their shoulder partner. The rest of the class went off well. Sunny continued speaking about certain aspects of Sea-Wing culture for the rest of the class, giving details to the winglets present on what to expect for the coming test. When the gong rang, Peacemaker followed Cliff and Alligator out of the class. And for the first time in the term, Alligator spoke excitedly. "This is going to be so great!" Alligator said, speaking uncharacteristically loud, which almost startled Peacemaker and Cliff. "I hope we covered the ruins in the desert, or the metal objects that had scavenger remains in them, or the strange monuments found in the Mud Kingdom, or—" Cliff interjected quickly. "Alligator, slow down!" The Scouting Prince spoke over Alligator, who almost walked right into a wall as he spoke, while Peacemaker and Cliff were making a turn to the prey center. Alligator, upon realizing his excitement had almost caused him to go snout first into a wall, looked back at the others sheepishly. "Sorry," Alligator muttered as he caught up with the two members of his winglet. "Don't be," Peacemaker answered, smiling for his clawmate. "We're glad you're excited." This made Alligator smile appreciatively. "Not many dragons like hearing me talk about scavengers this much," Alligator admitted as they reached the prey center. "Only Hyena ever lets me talk about it." "Well, we know you," Cliff admitted. "I mean, you can be a little weird during discussions. Sometimes I'll lose you and Hyena when we talk about history and science." Peacemaker looked at Cliff, frowning as he almost started a tangent. The Scouting Prince noticed the Nightwing Rainwing's look and quickly added, "But you're pretty cool as well, Alligator. You're smart, always willing to help us out." This made the Mudwing blush at Cliff's words. "Thanks," Alligator said, taking off his glasses a moment to wipe the lenses as they entered the cave for lunch. But before they could, Peacemaker heard a crash and several shouts of protest from the prey center. Just as they entered, Peacemaker saw something small run beneath him, along with the sound of small feet hitting the stone floor. Bending his long neck downwards, the Nightwing Rainwing hybrid looked at the ground and just caught the sight of a small, two-legged creature turning the corner down the tunnel. Looking back up, he was greeted with the sight of Jaguar skidding on the ground in front of him, smashing right into Peacemaker and sending both of them crashing to the floor. "Oof!" Peacemaker groaned as he hit the floor first, with Jaguar on top of him. "Hey, Rainwing! Watch where you're going!" came Cliff's voice, shouting at Jaguar as he shoved the Rainwing off of Peacemaker, allowing him to stand. But instead of apologizing or making a biting comment back at Cliff, the Rainwing instead was looking around. Looking back at Peacemaker, Jaguar spoke quickly. "Did you see it?" What?" Peacemaker asked, confused. "The scavenger!" came the voice of Hyena as she skidded out of the prey center in front of Peacemaker and the others. "Scavenger?" Cliff and Alligator spoke. The latter appeared interested, but mostly concerned as his eyes widened. A little scavenger was inside a school of dragons. No doubt, with some dragons not caring where they stepped. "Yeah," Hyena answered. "It stole something for the project! Something major!" Realizing what had run underneath him, Peacemaker's eyes widened. "That way?" He pointed down the tunnel the little creature had run. "I'll get it," Jaguar said, quickly racing in the direction Peacemaker had just pointed. "Like how you got Peacemaker?" Cliff interjected as he bolted after Jaguar. "Be careful with what it's carrying!" Hyena yelled after the other two. "It's priceless!" she added, when neither Cliff nor Jaguar answered her. The Sandwing growled and raced after them. "Hyena!" Alligator shuddered a protest as he ran after Hyena. "Don't hurt it!" And just like that, Peacemaker was alone, standing in front of the entrance to the prey center, his eyes blinking in confusion at what had just happened. First, a scavenger ran underneath him. Then Jaguar, accidentally, crashed into him to chase said scavenger. Then, one by one, most of his winglet were chasing after the little creature, carrying something for their history project. That Peacemaker still had no idea what it was the scavenger was even holding. Maybe he should just go into the prey center and just have some lunch. while his winglet got into trouble chasing a scavenger. Groaning, Peacemaker bounded in the direction the others went. Turning the corner, he saw that the chase had already gone awry. Down the hallway, Peacemaker saw the others trying to pounce onto a small creature, but always failing as it zigzagged across the hallway. Cliff and Jaguar had tried to grab it, but smacked right into each other in midair, right as the scavenger veered out of their way. Hyena was swift, but not enough to catch it. Alligator was not trying to catch the scavenger, just yelling at Hyena to be careful with the creature. The scavenger had managed to run out of Hyena's path and run down the tunnel right for Peacemaker. Upon seeing him, the scavenger skidded to a halt, seeing yet another dragon. Both looked at each other for a moment, the pale-skinned creature with long, light fur on its head looking both afraid and in awe at Peacemaker, noticing the multicolored stars on his wing membranes. Realizing he could capture it, he rose his wings. After a second of concentration, Peacemaker manipulated the color of the stars to change a variety of colors, from red, blue, green, purple, etc. While he could not change the colors of his scales, the rainwing side of him let him change the colors of his wing membrane stars. The scavenger was on the move again, racing down the tunnel, evading the court's wingless attempts to capture it. Hyena, pushing Cliff off of her, pointed in the direction of the scavenger's escape, yelled, "Get that thieving pest!" Not long after saying that, Cliff, Jaguar, and Hyena were on their feet, chasing after it, with Alligator following in protest. Groaning, Peacemaker followed. The pursuit was far from a clean one, both figuratively and literally. As Peacemaker and the others pursued the little creature, it would take any opportunity to use its surroundings. That included dragons coming out of the side caves. Hyena, Cliff, and Jaguar almost carelessly knocked into passerbys' paths that the scavenger had run beneath, almost knocking dragons to the ground, who all sent angry protests directed at them. "Sorry! They didn't mean that! Are you okay?" Peacemaker would say to each of the dragons his winglet nearly crashed into. The situation intensified as the scavenger ran underneath Starflight, who was walking with Clay, discussing something. Hyena, as she pursued the scavenger, accidentally knocked into the librarian, sending books he had been carrying into the air. As the others continued their pursuit, Peacemaker leaped over the confused founders and caught the books before they hit the ground, handing them to the blind Nightwing, who looked utterly confused at what was happening. "Sorry, Starflight," Peacemaker said, quickly running the other direction. "Wait!" Clay had shouted, almost sternly, which made Peacemaker flinch. He had not spoken with Clay much during his time at the Academy, but Peacemaker knew that when Clay, arguably the kindest of the former Dragonets of Destiny, raised his voice, you were in trouble. But he would worry about that later. The chase continued futilely. At one point, the 5 Dragonets had fallen on top of each other again. As the scavenger ran away from the pile of Dragonets, its path put it in front of the entrance of a study cave, the same one that the court's winglet regularly used, and that Ermine had been using and was now leaving with a bag of scrolls. "Ermine!" Hyena shouted, causing the Icewind to look up from her scroll, and was met with the sight of 5 members of her winglet laying in a pile a distance away as a scavenger ran in her direction. Peacemaker could only imagine how ridiculous they looked to Ermine right now. "Stop the scavenger!" Hyena shouted to the Icewing. "You are our last line of defense!" Just as the scavenger stopped in front of her, looking up at the Icewing, Ermine raised a brow. Instead of stopping it, she stepped out of the scavenger's way, allowing this confused creature to bolt past. "Ah! Ermine!" Hyena whined just as she, Peacemaker, and the others had untangled themselves and continued to pursue the scavenger. "Thanks a lot!" Hyena groaned as she shoved past Ermine, who rolled her eyes at Hyena. "Sorry," Peacemaker said again as he ran by Ermine. Minutes passed as the chase continued for what felt like forever. But it had stopped just as the scavengers about to turn a corner for one of the academy entrances, only to be met with the sight of Tempest as she and a group of 3 Seawings landed after coming back from a hunt. The scavenger, scared at the sight of the 4 dragons, quickly veered to the side and went into a crack into a cave wall. "Ha!" Cliff shouted, almost triumphantly, as he approached the crack in the wall. "Cornered like a scavenger."
"It is a scavenger, Prince,"
Jaguar panted, his scales a dark red with irritation from the pursuit. "What the heck is going on?" came the voice of one of the Seawings, wave from the jade winglet. "Looks like you guys have run across the continent," Tempest spoke as she approached most of her winglet, bending her head and neck down to look in the crack. "Were you chasing this poor scavenger across the school?" "Only because it has something for the project," Hyena said defensively as she approached the crack and looked in it. "You better come out of there right now." "I don't think threatening it is going to work, Hyena," Peacemaker said, trying to calm down the agitated Sandwing.
"It definitely won't,"
Alligator added. "I'm sorry," came the voice of another Seawing, this time from Gull of the Silver Winglet. "But this has nothing to do with the rest of us." She gestured to the rest of the Seawings, aside from Tempest. "So, we're just going to leave." "Okay," Tempest said, gesturing with her wing. "You guys go ahead. I'm going to help here." As the Seawings walked away, Tempest again looked in the crack. "So, it has something for the project?" Tempest asked, though already knowing the answer. Looking up, she rose a brow. "Why not just get something else?" "Because," Hyena said, "it is a historical artifact from the reign of Queen Anaconda." "What are you doing with an artifact belonging to Queen Anaconda?" Peacemaker asked, curiously, remembering how she had stolen an artifact that Queen Thorn had gifted the Academy. "It is something from a dig site in the Mud Kingdom," Hyena explained. "My parents had dug it up a few years back, and I figured we could use it for the project." She bent her head down, looking in the crack again towards the scavenger inside. "Which is priceless, if I might add." Okay, Peacemaker interjected, gently pushing Hyena away from the crack. "Let's just try and get it without hurting the scavenger."
"Please,"
Alligator added, gently twining his tail with Hyena's, which had a calming effect on her. "Fine," Hyena muttered, stepping away from the crack. Taking a chance to look through the crack, Cliff glanced through, spotting the scavenger. "It's cornered, so it has no other place to go," Cliff stated, looking at the others. "One of us could reach in and, carefully, grab it." "Blunt, but it can work," Tempest agreed. "Glad you agree, Tempest," Cliff said, before looking at Jaguar and pointing at him. "I nominate Jaguar. He's the smallest of us." "I am not that small!" Jaguar protested loudly. His scales turned an even darker red in outrage. "You do it, Your Highness!" Cliff chuckled a bit. Peacemaker could not help but roll his eyes. His cavemates constantly trying to one-up on the other was something he'd listened to daily. Okay, Cliff said as he leaned down and held out his arm, sending it into the crack. "All right, I think I can feel it." "Careful," Alligator stated, showing absolute concern for the creature, but also for Cliff. "It's scared and cornered. Animals are dangerous when both happen at once." "Oh, come on, Alligator," Cliff said, pushing his arm further. "It's not like it can... Ouch!" Peacemaker and the others jumped back in fright as Cliff yelled and yanked out his arm from the crack. Looking at his arm, Peacemaker and the others saw that while Cliff was not bleeding much, there was a small weapon that was jabbed into one of the Skywing's talons. It was small, did not go deep, but Cliff clearly felt it. "Why, you little!" Cliff yelled, his mouth smoking as he did. "Whoa, whoa!" Peacemaker interjected, stepping in between Cliff and the wall, gently pushing his friend away. "Just take it easy." "It stabbed me with the weapon!" Cliff retorted, holding up his hand and pulling the little shiny weapon out of his talon. "Well, you did kind of freak it out," Alligator added quietly, shrinking from the Skywing's annoyed look. "Burning the scavenger won't help, Cliff," Peacemaker pointed out. "After all, it will destroy the artifact." Cliff looked at Peacemaker, then at the crack, annoyed, but slowly calmed down and nodded before walking out towards the cave entrance, letting the cool air calm him down. "So, how do we get it?" Jaguar asked, looking in the crack. Before Peacemaker could ask, Alligator suddenly spoke. "What was the artifact, Hyena?" "A ring," she answered, "made completely out of ruby. It said that Anaconda's contacts have found a cave full of rubies, and one carved into a ring to be given to Queen Crane, to start the Rainwing Mudwing Alliance." "So you're saying it's a precious metal?" Alligator pondered, rubbing his chin. "That explains some things." "I'm sorry?" Tempest asked, raising a brow at the Mudwing. "But why would a scavenger sneak into a mountain full of dragons just for a pretty stone?" "Because," Alligator said, approaching at Peacemaker for some reason, "I've watched scavenger communities from a distance. There are huge sections of a den dedicated to scavengers giving each other things, trading, if you will, for other stuff like food." Alligator looked at Peacemaker, gesturing to his bag of strawberries, and that is when it clicked in his mind. What if the scavenger was desperate enough to go into a cave of dragons because it wanted to give something to another scavenger to trade for food, and the only way it would even remotely let go of something of great value was if it got what it wanted? Food. With a nod, Peacemaker quickly plucked out 2 strawberries from his bag and leaned down to look into the crack. Inside, he saw the scavenger looking at him with wide green eyes, fearfully. Another sharp, shiny object was in its hands, just like the one that had been stabbed into Cliff's talon. It looked ready to stab Peacemaker if he did the same thing as Cliff. But he wouldn't. Slowly, Peacemaker rolled the strawberries close to the crack entrance, pushing them inside in a way so the scavenger could grab them. Looking in the hole again, he could see the scavenger looking at him with almost a confused expression, but clearly wanting the strawberries. Peacemaker stepped away from the crack and waited. Half a minute passed, and Peacemaker heard a small clink noise from inside the hole. And suddenly, the scavenger bolted out of the hole, with 2 strawberries in its arms that fit under its arms. *1. Peering back into the crack that the scavenger had just left, Peacemaker saw a shiny red object inside, the ring that it had stolen. Looking back at his friends, Peacemaker smiled triumphantly as he reached into the hole to reach the ruby ring.
"You should be in the darkness, not I."
Suddenly, something had grabbed hold of Peacemaker's arm and pulled him towards the hole, making him yell in a panic as he felt talons dig into his scales. Next thing Peacemaker knew, darkness had completely enveloped him as he saw a pair of talons grabbing at his hand. Looking up at his owners, Peacemaker's heart stopped as he saw rotting white scales stained in blue blood. "Hey! Hey, Peacemaker! Peacemaker!" Peacemaker's eyes opened as he felt a pair of talons shaking him. Looking back, Peacemaker saw that, instead of an Icewing, it was Cliff staring at him with concern, as Peacemaker still had his arm in the crack, talons wrapped around the ring. "What is it?" Cliff asked, You froze there for a moment, buddy. Peacemaker saw Alligator, Hyena, and Tempest stare at him, a mixture of confusion and concern. I, Peacemaker said, not entirely sure what had happened himself, but still felt his heart beating rapidly. Thought I felt a spider. It was a terrible lie, he knew, but in all honesty, he did not know how to tell the others the truth if he did not know it either. Everyone looked at him with a raised brow, looking at one another skeptically. Wanting to change the subject, Peacemaker quickly pulled his arm out and held up his hand. Opening his talons, he revealed the ruby ring in the middle of his palm, still shining brightly despite everything. Hyena sighed in relief. Oh, thank goodness, she said, taking the ring, smiling at Peacemaker. My parents would have killed me if I misplaced. Quartz winglet! Peacemaker and the others almost jumped out of their scales as they heard a stern shout from behind them. Looking back, the six were met with the stern gaze of Tsunami herself, who looked far from pleased as she approached. It was at that moment that Peacemaker, Cliff, Jaguar, Hyena, and unfortunately, Alligator, realized why she was angry, remembering what the commotion they had caused. All the while, Tempest looked on confused. The instructor caves were used by the Academy's teachers to hold meetings with one another out of the prying eyes of the students. It was here where the Academy founders and teachers discussed curriculum, student behavior, or any information relevant to the functioning of the school in general. It was also the cave where students would go to if they were to face disciplinary action. In this case, it was the Quartz winglet. All 7 dragonettes were present as Peacemaker and the others explained to Tsunami what had happened in detail. Despite looking frustrated, Tsunami had been quiet the entire time, listening to the students' explanations for their actions. Even though he had not initially taken part in it, and really did not want to be in trouble, Peacemaker knew there was no point in denying his involvement. He did not want to deny anything, in fear he would be abandoning Hyena, Jaguar, and Cliff. Tempest and Ermine were present, the latter who was standing at the side reading, as she had not done anything. But Tempest stood with the winglet. When Tsunami told Tempest she was not in trouble, the younger singer responded, I'm used to it. After everyone had finished telling their side, Tsunami sighed as she rubbed her brow. Okay. So a scavenger sneaks into the school, snatches something for your project. You chase it, almost knock Starflight over, and could have caused damage. Please tell me you at least got what you needed back. Hyena flashed the ruby to Tsunami, which caused the headmistress to raise her wings. Well, at least it was not for nothing, Tsunami muttered. Peacemaker wondered if she and Queen Glory were trading letters on sarcasm. But that still leaves the fact that your winglet caused some damage in the prey center and the hallway. Standing up, she approached the winglet. You will be helping with cleanup for tonight and tomorrow in the prey center. Everyone in the winglet flinched at hearing this, knowing how dirty the prey center could get after meals. While I appreciate your enthusiasm about your work, Tsunami continued. She sounded both sarcastic and serious upon saying this. You can't just tear apart the school just over one scavenger. Carrying a historical artifact, Hyena interjected, who quickly shut her mouth as Tsunami glared at her. This will not be marked against you, Tsunami said, much to Peacemaker's and the others' relief. But next time, please come to Clay, Sunny, Starflight, the teachers and I before tearing apart our school over your project. Understood? Crystal, Jaguar answered with a nod from the rest of the winglet. Good, Tsunami replied before gesturing to them to leave. Before Peacemaker could leave, Tsunami pulled him to the side. I've heard your grades are starting to improve, she said. Yeah, Peacemaker answered, smiling. It's good to hear Webbs and Longhorn are not putting you to sleep with their lectures, Tsunami said, chuckling. Could never understand how Starflight could sit through Webb's lessons under the mountain. He's not bad, just needed help studying, Peacemaker pointed out, which Tsunami nodded. Despite the trouble your winglet caused today, it's nice to see you doing well. Moon kept sending me letters about how worried she was as soon as she learned you would be attending, Tsunami said. After a pause, she gestured for him to follow his winglet. As he bounded out of the cave, Peacemaker made his way after his winglet to the prey center to help clean up. As he approached, he could hear Ermine speaking. I can't believe this, Ermine muttered. Told you to grab it, Hyena countered. And get involved in that mess? No, Ermine replied. I didn't hear you and Tempest were required to clean, Jaguar pointed out with a raised brow. As I said, Tempest replied, I'm used to it. What's that supposed to mean? Jaguar asked. I have 4 younger brothers, Tempest said, with a shrug. I'm used to helping them clean up. Well, that explains it, Hyena said, but looked at Ermine. Why are you going to help? Because I'm caught up on work for the week, Ermine answered with a shrug. And I'm bored. So, you're going to do cleanup to satisfy that boredom? Cliff asked with a tilted head. Whatever you say, Prince Cliff. Ermine shrugged again. As the others spoke, Alligator pulled Peacemaker to the side for a moment. Thanks, the Mudwing said, smiling, for helping me out back there. Getting this scavenger out, I mean. It's no problem, Peacemaker replied, smiling back. Never saw a scavenger before. Didn't know they were so small. Amazing how smart they can be despite that, Alligator replied as the two walked to catch up with the others. Indeed, Peacemaker said, pausing for a moment. Guess I'll be learning more about them in the coming weeks. As they reached the prey center, Peacemaker and Alligator spoke some more over the conversation of the rest of their winglet. Alligator explained random facts about scavengers, such as how they used animal furs to keep warm. Entering the prey center, however, Peacemaker paused as the rest of the winglets entered, oblivious to him falling behind. From the corner of his eye, Peacemaker could have sworn he saw someone watching him. Turning around, he felt a chill run down his spine as he looked down the dark corridor of the cave to his left. Feeling his heart beat rapidly, Peacemaker quickly trotted into the prey center after his winglet. Asterisk 1. According to Sutherland, animals and the other things in the Wings of Fire world are larger than what it is in our world, so a strawberry that could fit in between the 2 talons of a dragon would likely be large for scavengers, humans,